my brother Yusuf. Calls him my brother because all the prophets are brothers, meaning the same religion of God. I am amazed at the patience of Yusuf and at his generosity, and Allah will forgive him. Yaghfirullah, Allah meaning Allah will forgive him. When he was asked to interpret the dream, the Prophet is saying, I would not have done so until I put a condition on them that they let me out. Now notice, this is our Prophet saying that may Allah have mercy on Yusuf, may Allah bless him for his patience, and Allah will forgive him. I couldn't have done that. That's what he's saying. I would have put a condition that I'm not going to interpret the dream until I am let out. And then he repeated the phrase, and I am amazed at the patience of Yusuf and his generosity, and Allah will forgive him. When the messenger came, this we're talking about 2 verses later, when the messenger comes and the messenger says, the king is calling you, the Prophet ﷺ said that he refused to go until he made sure that his excuse was well known. Had it been for me, if I had been in his case, I would have rushed to the door. لَبَادَرْتُ الْبَابِ. In other words, the Prophet ﷺ is saying that I could not have done this. Now, does this mean that Yusuf is better than our Prophet ﷺ? As we said, firstly, all comparisons are general. We don't make comparisons to put any prophet down, any prophet above. As we believe as Muslims, all prophets, لَا نُفَرِّقُ بَيْنَ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ. We don't draw distinctions between them. All of them we respect and we admire. Secondly, as we said last week, some prophets might have one blessing that other prophets don't have. And this is a blessing in a particular area, and it still could be overall that one prophet is higher than another, even if that other has one particular blessing or issue that the first one does not have. So we respect all the prophets and put them in their places that they deserve. The point being, even our Prophet ﷺ is amazed and surprised. And he says, I am amazed at how patient Yusuf was. Had I been in his shoes, I would not have been able to do this. I would have rushed out. I would have put a condition that they release me before I interpret the dream. So Yusuf alayhi salam hears the dream and immediately understands it. Now the man says, tell me the interpretation so that I can go back and inform the people. Inform them about what? 2 things. Number 1, the interpretation of the dream. Number 2, I need to inform them about you as well. Now the man says, okay, I will inform them about you. I'll inform them so that they may know your state and your condition. So Yusuf alayhi salam says, تَزْرَعُونَ سَبْعَ سِنِينَ دَأَبًا. For 7 years, for 7 consecutive years, you shall sow and reap your grain as usual, da'aba, as your habit was. Now, this is a statement of fact. For 7 years you shall sow your grain. But this statement of fact is actually intended as a command. Yusuf alayhi salam, as a prisoner in jail, is commanding the people, this is what they need to do. He's offering them a solution, even though he wasn't asked for one. He was simply asked to interpret. And the interpretation would have been, well, you're going to have 7 years of luscious produce and 7 years of drought. End of story. That's the interpretation. But how can a prophet of God not want good for the people? How can he be stingy and miserly on benefiting humanity? They've come to him to find out about the interpretation of the dream. He not only interprets, he tells them how to protect themselves. He tells them what to do to guard their own interests. So he says, فَمَا حَصَدْتُمْ. Whatever you harvest, فَذَرُوهُ فِي سُنْبُلِهِ. Leave it in its sheath, in its covering. Except for a little bit. Except for a small amount that you have to eat. So 80% of your harvest, 90% of your harvest, don't touch it. Just store it. So that, and leave it in the cover so that it doesn't spoil. It doesn't rot. We will need to use it later on. ثُمَّ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ سَبْعٌ شِدَادٌ. Then after this there shall come 7 very hard years. 7 very traumatic years. يَأْكُلْنَ مَا قَدَّمْتُمْ لَهُنَّ. They shall devour and eat up. So this is the interpretation of the 7 thin cows eating the 7 fat cows. They shall devour and eat up what you have prepared for them. all except for a little that which you have guarded. In other words, by the time the 7 years are over, all of your silos, all of your storage facilities would be completely empty except for a few grains left. So Yusuf alayhi salam is telling them, this is what you need to do. And then there shall come ثُمَّ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ عَامٌ. After the 14 years, 7 years of blossoming, 7 years of drought. After these 14 years, there shall come a year. فِيهِ يُغَاثُ النَّاسِ. In that year there shall be abundant rain. وَفِيهِ يَعْصِرُونَ. And in that year they shall be able to press grapes in order to make wine. In other words, the produce will be so abundant. Wine is a luxury. You need to eat before you can drink. You will have so much you will eat, and then you will even have enough to drink. You will have enough to fill your stomachs, and then you can enjoy and live a luxurious life and even be allowed to drink. Now, we understand therefore where Yusuf alayhi salam got this interpretation from. The 7 fat cows symbolize the 7 years of plentiness, of abundantness. And the 7 thin cows, they symbolize the 7 years of drought. Now, the dream was strange because you would expect the fat cows, the heavy cows, to devour the thin cows. But in this case, it was the thin cows that devoured the fat cows. So Yusuf a.s. automatically understood that the 7 thin cows would get rid of the 7 fat cows. So Yusuf is telling them, fatten your cows even more. Store your grain. Because those thin cows will eat up everything that you have, and they need them. So the interpretation of the cows eating one another symbolizes that the grain or the produce or the harvest will be completely taken up by the next 7. And of course, the grain symbolizes what they need to do. So the grain symbolizes that these cows are in fact, if you like, the grain. And so the dream is telling Yusuf a.s. the keys to unlocking the symbol of those dreams. Now, the question arises though, so we understand the 7 years, the 7 years. Where does the dream mention the 1 year of abundant produce and pressing wines? Where does the dream mention that? I mean, there doesn't seem to be any indication. You understand the point? The 15th year, where is this mentioned in the dream? And this is something that shows the full understanding of Yusuf alayhi salam. And that is because after 7 years of drought, the only way to overcome drought, for the drought to come to an end, is to have a complete surplus of rain. Or else the drought would not finish. If you had mediocre rain, you're not back to normal. You're not back to status quo. In order to be back to status quo, there has to be a deluge of rain, a complete soaking, if you like, of the soil. So Yusuf a.s. understood that the fact that there's a limit being set, 7 years, must mean that the 8th year will not be like any average year. It must be an amazing, far above average year in order to wipe out the 7 years of drought. And this is exactly what indeed had happened. So, now of course, over here, you understand and we benefit. We've been saying this from the very beginning throughout our entire series. Yusuf alayhi salam is concerned and he cares for the people around him. He doesn't look at the fact whether they're Muslim or not. They were not even believers in Allah. They were idolaters. They were pagans. They used to worship statues. Yet Yusuf alayhi salam cared enough for them to tell them how they should live their lives. To tell them how to protect the grain and to store the crop and to make sure that they are fed. And subhanAllah, this is exactly what our religion requires of us. That we care about the people around us. We care about human beings, regardless of whether they're Muslim or not. That we better their lives. We bring about mercy. We feed them. Yusuf a.s. was not obliged to give them a solution, was he? Right? He wasn't even obliged to answer them, correct? He's a prisoner in jail. But not only does he give them a response, he in fact tells them how they would save themselves. And if Yusuf alayhi salam had not told them this, they would have starved to death. And all of Egypt would have been devastated. But he needs, these are his fellow human beings. He needs to help them and protect them. And so Yusuf alayhi salam told them how to protect themselves. So the messenger comes back, he tells the king that this is the interpretation that I have received from the jail. The king is intrigued. Who is this man? What is his story? And so he is informed that Yusuf alayhi salam, he has been accused of seducing the wife of Aziz. And he was found guilty. Remember, that was the whole point, that they charged him with the crime and they just put him in jail, a false accusation. He was found guilty. And so he says, bring him to me. Let me speak to him. وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ ائْتُونِي بِهِ فَلَمَّا جَاءَهُ الرَّسُولُ. When the messenger came from the king, the messenger came with orders to have Yusuf released, to come to the palace. Yusuf says, no, go back to your king. Go back to your master and ask him to find out what is the story of the women who cut their hands. Go ask him to find out what is the story of the women who cut their hands. Verily, my Lord is well aware of the plot that they hatched. Now, there is no doubt that the crime that Yusuf was accused of is a crime of a moral nature. And even in this society, these crimes are not that big of a deal. If a politician is caught with a prostitute or something, it's a scandal. But hey, life goes on, right? It's not the worst of crimes. And if Yusuf alayhi salam had got into the palace, most likely this issue would have been forgotten. He would have been honored. He would have got a hefty paycheck or salary. Thank you very much. And then, khalas, free, go your way now. But Yusuf alayhi salam does not want people to think evil of him. He doesn't want people to think that he has fallen into this type of crime. And so Yusuf alayhi, and of course there's no reason, the trial is done and over with, right? There's even in our constitution in America, once a man has been tried for something, you're not tried for something else, right? You can't be a double guilty clause, right? The double jeopardy there, you cannot get that done. Now, of course, I'm not saying they had the same clause, but the point being, Yusuf would not have been tried again, right? It's a done deal now. That's it. You know, case closed. Yusuf alayhi salam wants to reopen the case. And the only way he can force the case to be reopened is to petition the Supreme Court, i.e. the king himself. And so he tells the messenger, go back to your king and ask him, what is the affair of those women who cut up their hands? Now notice here, many beautiful points here. Obviously, it's clear he wants to clear his name up. He's full of humility and modesty. He's full of haya. He cares about his karam, his honor. He doesn't want people to think him to be a low character. And that is more important to him than leaving jail. Because if he left jail, he'd have his physical freedom. But how about his prestige? How about the freedom of being accused of a crime? How about his character? And his character is more important to him than physically being locked up in jail. And this is exactly the attitude of the believer. That his character, his izzah, his honor is more important than physical hardship. Secondly, notice that he asks the king to find out the affairs of the women who cut their hands. Now, what did the women who cut their hands actually do? What are they guilty of?
They incited the wife of the Amir.
They incited the wife of Aziz, right? But that's not a major crime. Who is he not accusing when he talks about the women who cut their hands? The wife of Aziz. She's absent in the accusation. It's interesting, right? I mean, the guilty party is not being accused. Why? Two reasons. Number one, because still Yusuf alayhi salam is, despite the fact that he needs to clear his name, he is a modest man. And he doesn't want to, just like when the initial issue happened, he didn't go into explicit detail, as we said over and over. He simply alluded to the point without being explicit. Similarly here, he doesn't want to point a finger at her and say, she did this and this. He wants to get there without actually getting there. You see my point, right? This shows really his manhood. It shows his haya, his modesty. And secondly, by simply leaving the story open without telling details, go to the king and find out what is the affair of those women who cut their hands. The human mind is piqued with interest. What is the affair? This is human psychology. Had he simply accused, go find out those women who tried to seduce me and they weren't able to, the whole story is given. Right? The beans are spilled, if you like. Now there's nothing wrong with that. But Yusuf alayhi salam wants the king to be interested. He wants the king to find out. You all know the story of Shahrazad and the 1001 Nights, huh? You never finish the story, you leave it open. Khalas, I'll finish tomorrow. Okay? So the point here, Yusuf alayhi salam gives enough details, right? To simply allow the king to say, what is the story? What happened? And so he finds out, he calls, now, notice as well, of course, that Yusuf alayhi salam, in the way that he describes this, he doesn't even make an accusation. He simply says, they plotted. They didn't actually do a crime. Their kaid, their plotting, Allah is aware of. Now notice here, the reason why they didn't do a crime, if they did a crime, he would be guilty as well, right? So he doesn't accuse them of a crime, he accuses them of plotting a crime. And all of this is in the perfection of eloquence and of his own akhlaq and mannerisms. Now, once again, I remind you of what the Prophet ﷺ said. May Allah have mercy on Yusuf, and I'm amazed at his patience. Had I been in prison as long as he had been, and the messenger had come to me to go to the king, I would have, this is exactly the wording of the hadith, I would have raced to the door. This is our process of speaking. And there's nothing unmanly about what he said, because that is true too. If anybody had been locked up for 7 years for a false crime, now there's a petition from the court, come, I want to hear your case. People are going to rush out, khalas, alhamdulillah. But Yusuf alayhi salam wants to get to complete certainty that he is innocent of this. So, the king calls the women. And again, the Qur'an does not mention all of these details. The beauty of the Qur'an, it doesn't go into all of these details. It simply tells you what you need to know. The rest is understood. The Qur'an does not say, so he sent for the women and they came. All of this is irrelevant. It's understood. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla says, the king said, what was the matter with you? Now he's speaking to the women who had cut their hands. So he's invited all of them. He's invited the wife of Aziz. Now notice, it is impossible that the king would otherwise have gotten involved with such a petty issue. Correct? He would not even have heard of Yusuf. He would not even have heard of the affair. But Allah Azza wa Jal willed otherwise. By allowing the king to see a dream, by letting Yusuf respond to it, by then being this enigmatic person he still hasn't seen because he's refused to be let out of the jail. Now the king really wants to know. And all of this is human psychology that Yusuf a.s. is taking advantage of. The king has now a huge personal interest, and all of this will come back to reward Yusuf in the end. Patience has its fruits. Patience has its fruits. And Yusuf a.s. knew that. So the king says, what was the matter with you? What was the affair with you? What actually happened when you tried to seduce Yusuf? So he knows that they tried to seduce Yusuf. The charge was not against the women who had cut their hands. The charge was against Yusuf and the wife of Aziz, right? The women who had cut their hands, they were not really guilty of any crime, but they were guilty of trying to coax Yusuf into that act. But they themselves were not guilty of a crime. So he says, tell me what happened. Did anything actually happen? قَالَ مَا خَطْبُكُنْ. What is your affair? What is the matter? Tell me what happened when you tried to seduce Yusuf. The king already knows they tried to seduce him. But the charge is that he agreed, and the charge is that he corrupted the wife of Aziz. That's the charge, right? So what was it? So they said, Hasha lillah. God forbid. Hasha lillah. It's like saying Subhanallah. Hasha lillah. God forbid. So by this they're trying to say, no, we didn't really try to seduce him. God forbid. How could you accuse us of that? Hasha lillah. And then they defend Yusuf alayhi salam as well. Ma alimna alayhi min su. We don't know of anything wrong that he did. Our testimony is that he's a clear man. We don't know anything wrong. We didn't accuse him of anything. Ma alimna alayhi min su. So they testify, trying to clear themselves by the first phrase, Hasha lillah. God forbid, how could you say that? We didn't do anything. And then they also put Yusuf in a clean, and they say, we don't know anything wrong that he has done either, as well. So when all of them testified that Yusuf was of good character, there's only one person left, the wife of Aziz. All these women are testifying, no, Yusuf was a good character, he didn't do anything wrong. So now the wife of Aziz says, Al-ana hashas al-haq. Now the truth has become clear. Now the truth, hashasa means tabayyana. Hashasa means it is now clear. When everybody has testified, I can't now go against all of this testimony. It's too late now. It's been, at least it would have been 8-9 years before this incident had occurred now, right? And many of the scholars say that the Aziz had died by now, and so she is now a widow. And so she is coming now as a widow, her husband has died, and there's this reputation of her that she has committed a crime with a slave. And no doubt that society would have been, how it, gossip and innuendo and slander, it would have been with her for the last 8 years, never left her. So she's saying, finally, let's get to the truth then. الآن حصحص الحق. She's been living with this guilt, she's been living with the whole society speaking about her. So she says, let the truth be clear now. And there's also the sense of, I've been cornered. All these women have testified. What am I going to do now? Right? الآن حصحص الحق. Now, the truth is clear. أنا راودته عن نفسه. I was the one who tried to seduce him, not the other way around. So now she confesses. أنا راودته عن نفسه وإنه لمن الصادقين. And he was surely لمن الصادقين. The lam here, surely he was always truthful. There's no doubt that he was of the truthful people. He was of the righteous people. I was the one who was guilty. ذلك ليعلم. I say this so that it may be known. أني لم أخنه بالغيب. That I did not betray him in his absence, in the ghaib. وأن الله لا يهدي كيد الخائنين. And that Allah Azza wa Jal does not guide the plotting of those who betray, of the traitors. Now, the main interpretation, the dominant interpretation, it is clearly the correct one, and so we will go with it in interpreting the verse. This is the wife of Aziz saying, I say this now so that he may know, and everyone may know, that I never betrayed my husband. I never did the deed. You can imagine that till his dying day, Aziz would have had doubts. Did it happen? Did it not happen? Was my wife loyal to me or not? You can imagine, like any man in that situation, there would be these lingering doubts. So now she says, look, I'm saying this so that the truth be known. I was loyal to him. I did not actually betray that trust. إِنِّي لَمْ أَخُنْهُ بِالْغَيْبِ. And indeed, if I were to have done so, Allah Azza wa Jal, or God, because she does not believe in the Lord that we call Allah, but the term Allah means God here, that Allah does not guide those who are treacherous and betrayers. Meaning that even I know that if I had actually betrayed him, I would have been exposed in a much more worse manner. But now she's saying, I never committed any sin, I never committed any crime, I didn't actually betray my husband. Now she has to add on, وَلَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي. I'm not saying I'm innocent. What she's saying is, she never actually committed the sin of fornication, the sin of adultery, but she's not saying I'm innocent. I know I committed a sin. What was the sin? Of attempting to seduce him. وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي. I'm not saying I'm innocent. And this is, she's being completely honest here. She's saying, I didn't betray my husband, but I'm not saying I'm innocent. I know I have my sins, but she doesn't say what it is. She leaves it as that, right? وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي. She simply says, إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ. Verily, the souls of people continually try to command them to commit evil. So she blames it on her soul. It's not my fault. It was beyond my control. I was just so infatuated in love. It's not really my fault. Souls command people to do evil. إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي. Except for those souls who my Lord has shown mercy on. Verily my Lord is forgiving and merciful. In other words, I hope that my God will forgive me. Now, we said the dominant interpretation and clearly the correct one. I say clearly because the context, the wording, everything clearly indicates that this is the wife of Aziz saying that, look, I never betrayed my husband. I want everybody to know that. That doesn't mean I'm innocent. There's guilt. I was guilty. I'm not saying I'm totally innocent. But it's really, and then she tries to backtrack again. You can tell this is a typical guilty person, going back and forth. Well, it is my fault, but not quite, but a little bit, but not quite, going back and forth 4 times here, right? So in the end, she goes, I know I'm not fully innocent. It's really my own soul's fault. I can't really help it, except if Allah Azza wa Jal had saved it. So this is the dominant interpretation. Another interpretation is that when the wife of Aziz says, now the truth is clear, I tried to seduce him and he is of the truthful. Now the scene cuts, and now we're with Yusuf in the jail. And Yusuf says, not the wife of Aziz, Yusuf says, this, meaning the testimony of the wife, so that everyone may know that I did not betray him in secret. Now, if Yusuf is speaking, I did not betray him. Again, there's now two interpretations. The first him is Allah Azza wa Jal. I was faithful to Allah in not committing the sin. And this is one interpretation. But wallahi, this is very far, because he doesn't need the wife of Aziz to testify that he was faithful to Allah. Allah knows that. Another interpretation is that Yusuf says that I was faithful to him, meaning my Lord and Master. I was faithful to him and I did not betray his trust on me. And then Yusuf says, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي. I'm not saying I'm totally innocent. Once he says he didn't do the crime, then he says, but I was guilty of one thing. What was he guilty of? What was he guilty of? The hum, the wanting, the desire. So he's saying, I'm not saying I'm totally guilty. I know that I had a desire to commit the sin, but it's not really my fault, because the souls are inclined to evil, except those whom my Lord has mercy on. So this is the yet another interpretation. Now, yet a third interpretation is that this is indeed the wife of Aziz. But when she says, I say this so that he may know that I never betrayed him, she is referencing not her husband, but Yusuf alayhi salam. You guys following these three interpretations, right? The wife of Aziz is saying that I say this so that everybody may know I never betrayed him, meaning Yusuf. How did he not betray Yusuf? Means I didn't lie blatantly about him. I want him to know I wasn't treacherous. I'm telling the truth now, that I was the one who seduced him. He was not the one who seduced me. So there's three interpretations. The first of them is clearly the strongest one, and I think that that's pretty obvious, and that is the correct one, that the wife of Aziz is talking, and she's talking about, I never betrayed my husband. The second interpretation is Yusuf talking. And if Yusuf is talking, he's saying, I never betrayed Allah, or I never betrayed my master. The third interpretation, which is the weakest of all, is the wife of Aziz, the wife of Aziz saying, I was never betraying Yusuf, meaning I'm speaking the truth and I'm not smearing his reputation anymore, maybe she did in the past, and let everybody know that I was the one who seduced him. Now, the fact that the woman at the end testified to her guilt shows that there is something praiseworthy and something good on her part, even if she did not have faith in Allah, even if she belonged to a different religion, there was something deep down inside, and this is human conscience. A human's conscience is independent of religion. You can be an atheist and have a good conscience and good morale. And you can be a Muslim and have a bad conscience and bad morality. Religion is not necessarily linked. Sadly, we wish it were, right? But it's not. Religion is not necessarily linked to being a person of good conscience. So she is not a Muslimah, obviously, and yet her conscience now comes clean. And she mentions the exact truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. And that's a sign of a positive conscience, even if she doesn't have faith in Allah. Now, just a side point here quickly. She says, Inna nafsa la'ammaratun bisu. All souls command to do evil. Souls command the people to do evil. Scholars have talked about the categories of the souls and the different types of souls. And this is a long discussion in and of itself. Some scholars have said that the human soul is divided into three categories. The first of them is an-nafs al-mutma'inna, which is mentioned in which surah? Surah Al-Fajr. Al-nafs al-mutma'inna. And this is the soul of the believer. The soul of the believer is content, is happy, it's righteous. And the second is the soul of the one who does not have faith in Allah. And this is called an-nafs al-ammara bis-su, which is what she says. The soul that commands people to do evil. Because the soul of the believer does not command the believer to do evil all the time. So she's talking about the souls of those who have no faith in Allah. And then the third category of souls is an-nafs al-lawwama. An-nafs al-lawwama means the soul that is ever reproaching itself. Reproaching, getting angry, irritated at itself. So this is in the middle. Sometimes it goes to good, sometimes it goes to bad. So therefore it's always reproaching itself. So we have on the right side, the soul that is righteous and pious. An-nafs al-mutma'inna. We have on the opposite side, an-nafs al-ammara bis-su. The soul that is commanding to do evil. And then we have in the middle, an-nafs al-lawwama. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. Okay, these are three categories according to one opinion. According to another opinion, there's only two types of souls. النفس المطمئنة and النفس الأمارة بالسوء. And النفس اللوامة is a characteristic of both types. Because al-lawama means you're regretting. And every human being regrets, either good or bad. So the righteous person regrets, why don't I have more good? Why don't I do even better? Why don't I give even more money to the poor? Why can't I fast and pray even more? So he's always regretting. And the evil soul is always regretting the opposite. Why can't I get more money and more this and more haram, right? It's always regret. So some scholars say there's two categories of souls. Some scholars say that there are three categories. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. However, just one key point here. Her phrase, souls command their owners to do evil. We firmly believe this is not the soul of a righteous person. The righteous soul, the soul that is filled with faith, does not command its body to do evil. Such a soul is a pure soul. And we would go further and say that the way that Allah created souls is in the pure fashion and form. We believe that all humans are created pure and good, right? We don't believe that humans were conceived in evil and gave birth in evil and they are evil by nature. We believe وَلَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ, right? That man has been created in the best of all forms. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have honored the children of Adam. So we believe, and the Prophet ﷺ said, every soul is born upon the fitrah, upon the pure nature. Every child is born upon pure nature. And therefore, the general rule is that the human being is inclined to do good. This is the general rule. And when that human being has faith in Allah and has iman, then the soul becomes that which commands to do good. It's only when that faith leaves and he has no faith does the soul become al-ammara bis-su. So getting back to the story, وَقَالَ الْمَلِكُ ائْتُونِي بِهِ. The king said, bring him to me. أَسْتَخْلِصْهُ لِنَفْسِي. I want to choose him for myself. Istikhlas means to sift him up to myself. Now, notice, 3 lines ago, he simply told the messenger, bring him to me. Now that Yusuf has done his tactic, without even seeing Yusuf, the king has pronounced a verdict. I shall make him somebody in my inner circle. Subhanallah, notice this, right? If Yusuf hadn't done what he had done, like I said, the king would have showered him with gifts, set him free, say thank you very much, have a good life. But by doing what Yusuf did, by investing the patience, the time to clear his reputation, now the king is convinced. I mean, what type of man is this? What type of man is this that for such a petty crime, and it is petty in the grand scale of things, right? Suppose he did seduce his master's wife. It's not murder. It's not even stealing. It is a crime of passion that all men are sympathetic to, correct? It's not even that of a major issue. All men would be sympathetic to such a crime. It's not the worst crime you can commit. But Yusuf a.s. does not want his name tarnished. And so he puts in the effort, and before even seeing him, the king says, go bring him to me. He shall occupy some high place in my cabinet. أَسْتَخْلِصُ لِنَفْسِي. Now, when he brought him, فَلَمَّا كَلَّمَهُ. After he spoke to him face to face, خلاص نور على نور now, right? Even higher now. And he said, إِنَّكَ الْيَوْمَ لَدَيْنَا مَكِينٌ أَمِينٌ. Today you have reached in front of me, in front of us, you have reached makeen. Makeen means dhu makana. Makeen means a person of honor. Makeen means you have a status in my eyes. And Amin, you are a trustworthy person. I trust you. After all that you've done, you're an honorable man and you are a trustworthy man. Now this fits in 110% to what I've been saying since the very beginning of the surah, which is the first thing you have to do, establish your credentials before you give da'wah. You need to establish your credentials. You need to tell society who you are before you tell them what you are. Through you begin anything beyond that. So Yusuf alayhi salam has to establish his credentials. I'm an honest man. I'm a chaste, I'm a God-conscious man. I don't get involved in these immoral issues. So once Yusuf has done this, now the king has completely, he's opened up to him. And the king says, you occupy a status in my eyes. The king is saying, you occupy, I think you're higher than I am. Makeen. And I trust you completely. إِنَّكَ الْيَوْمَ لَدَيْنَا مَكِينٌ أَمِينٌ. And subhanAllah, again, we know this, that a human being is attracted to virtue and nobility, even if they are not believers in God. This is a pagan king. He worships a statue. He worships a hand-carved object, but he knows truth and honesty when he sees it. And this shows us Allah created mankind to know generically what is beautiful, what is truth, what is nobility. And the king, despite his paganism, recognizes honesty, sincerity, good morality. And so when he sees this in Yusuf, he says, you are a person of honor, integrity, and the word Ameen, come on, rings a bell with our own tradition. The Prophet ﷺ, he is Al-Ameen before he is Al-Nabi. He is Al-Ameen before he is Al-Rasul. You have to be Al-Ameen before you get to that level. And this is exactly what Yusuf does. And as I've said over and over again, we in our times put the horse before the cart, the cart before the horse. We don't understand the priorities. The priorities are, we establish our credentials before we open our mouths to speak. Actions speak louder than words, and Yusuf has done exactly that. Notice as well the cycle that's going on, and I referenced this a few weeks ago. Notice the cycle of trial and temptation, and then redemption and a high status. So Yusuf alayhi salam is in the loving care of his father, growing up the most loved, the beloved of all the children, and then overnight he's in the well. Notice from where to where, right? So from the loving care, comfort, tenderness of his house to a dark and damp and dirty and stinky well. And then overnight from the well, he's entered into a palace, but as a slave. But nonetheless, he's treated well and he's lavished. And his owner says, treat him nicely. Don't treat him like the other slaves. So from the well, he's patient in the well. He turns to Allah in the well. What happens? Allah saves him and puts him in the palace. So he lives a reasonably comfortable life. But then life is not just full of comfort. Life is meant to be trial and tribulation. What happens then? Overnight, from the palace to even a place worse than the well, the dark dungeons of the jail. And he stays in jail. The well was 3-4 days, 5 days. The jail, 7-8 years he stays. Dark and damp and poor, everything. You can imagine the jails of our times, how bad they're. Imagine the jails of those times. And he lives there. But then overnight from the jail, not just to a palace, but to the palace of the king. The king's palace. And the king tells him, literally in the morning, he is in the jail. In the night, the king tells him, you're a man of honor. I respect you and admire you. And not only then is he in the king's palace, but from the jail, he gets his own palace because he's made a minister. SubhanAllah, look at the back and forth, back and forth. And we learn from this. This is what life is about. Every trial that comes will be bigger than the previous one. But then, so too will the victory be sweeter. So too will the rebound be even stronger. This is the sunnah of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah will test and try us. And every time we undergo one trial, don't think that's the end of it. No, that's not the end of it. There will be a bigger trial. But then we've already learned from the previous trials. We're learning from the story of Yusuf. When that bigger trial comes, realize the sweets of that trial, the fruits of that trial will be even better than the fruits of the last one. So we see this as well back and forth in the story of Yusuf. Now that Yusuf alayhi salam has this trust, and the king basically says, today you're a man that we admire and respect, so it's an open door. What can I do for you? Yusuf alayhi salam says, اجعلني على خزائن الأرض. اجعلني على خزائن الأرض. Make me in charge of the treasures of the land, the storehouses, meaning the grain, the corn, if you like, crop. Make me in charge of this. In other words, in our times, make me the minister of finance. Make me the person who is in charge of finance. Inni hafiyun alim. He uses two characteristics, two adjectives. I am hafiz. Hafiz means I will protect and guard them. And alim, I know what to do. I'm a man of knowledge. Now, notice the two characteristics that he uses, the one of them applies to character, the other applies to skill. The one of them applies to reputation, the other to experience. All too often, especially in this world, we only concentrate on experience and credentials. We don't care about character. Isn't that true, right? That's what we, by and large, you simply base on degrees and experience and whatnot. But in Islam, we look at both things. And this is also a mistake on some of the, if you like, ultra-religious brothers, that they think all we need to do is just look at how big a man's beard is, right? How pious a person is. And then that's it, he'll get whatever he wants. No, here's Yusuf mentioning two characteristics, Hafiz and Alim. And we need to look at both of these characteristics, right? Now when the daughter of the man in Midian, whom many people say is Shu'aib, but it is not Shu'aib. Then when the daughter of the man in Midian goes back to her father and she says, oh my father, hire him. Talking about Musa, hire him. What are the two characteristics that she uses? Qawiyun Amin. Qawi and Amin. Qawi means he's strong. Now Musa was, mashallah, a giant. Musa was a strong man. And he's also Amin, a trustworthy man. Once again, one characteristic to do with character, another characteristic to do with job capability. And subhanAllah, all too often, the two extremes exist. In the secular world, we just care about job quality and job characteristics and adaptability. By and large, and let's be honest here, in many Islamic circles, all we care about is, mashallah, he's a good brother. That's it. No, it's more than just being a good brother. He prays 5 times a day. It's more to life than just praying tahajjud and being a Muslim in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. If you're placed in position and placed in authority, there has to be a healthy combination of both of these things, right? And that's exactly what Yusuf is saying and what the daughter of the man of Madian said. Now, notice here as well that Yusuf alayhi salam has no problems telling the minister that put me in charge of the grain. And from this, it is quite clear that it's a part of our religion to help out society in whatever way possible, and to benefit the community at large, even if it means that we will be in an infrastructure that is not an infrastructure of belief and iman. Just like the people of Egypt. Here is Yusuf, a believer in Allah and a prophet of Allah. Here is the administration, the infrastructure of Egypt, which is an infrastructure that did not believe in Allah. It's not an Islamic state, if you like, right? Yusuf alayhi salam has no problem suggesting himself and saying, look, I can help out. And wallahi, this is exactly, some of our brothers, again, they become so narrow-minded in this regard. It's like, no, we should not get involved. We should not get involved in public welfare and public office. Yani, this is not wise. You need to get involved because you need to help society. Just like Yusuf alayhi salam. He wants to help society. He wants to help the people. He knows he can do a good job. He's confident in that. And so he says, put me in charge of the grain, of the produce, and I will be in charge of that. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, inshallah we just have a few minutes left, then we'll open the floor for question. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ. This is how. This meaning all that has preceded. This is how we gave authority to Yusuf. Notice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, don't think this just happened. وَكَذَلِكَ. I had a plan. This is my methodology. I did this all for a reason. Everything happened according to my plan. وَكَذَلِكَ مَكَّنَّا لِيُوسُفَ فِي الْأَرْضِ. We established authority for Yusuf in the land. يَتَبَوَّأُ مِنْهَا حَيْثُ يَشَاءُ. He could go wherever he wants with power. As the minister of finance, automatically now, he is the most powerful minister in all of Egypt. And he can go with his entourage, and he can go and take charge of whatever he wants to. From being a prisoner to becoming the most powerful man. In some ways, he's even more powerful than the king because he controls the food of the people. And that is a position of even more authority and more demand, if you like, than the king himself. And so Allah says, this is how we gave Yusuf authority in the land, that he may take possession of whatever he wanted, meaning that he had the power to do so. Of course, the scholars say that Yusuf alayhi salam, he implemented his own program. And what was his program? Gather up all the grain and store as much of it as possible. For 7 years, people would simply hand over the produce to the government. And we would save it and store it until the next 7 years. Allah says, نُصِيبُ بِرَحْمَتِنَا مَن نَشَاءُ. We give of our mercy to whomever we please. وَلَا نُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And we never allow the reward of those who are good to be lost. Yusuf deserved all of this because he was righteous. Because of his righteousness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarded him. And this is a lesson for me and for you and for all of us. That when we are righteous to Allah, Allah will reward us back. Allah never allows the deeds of the righteous to go in vain. And Allah reaffirms this. وَلَأَجْرُ الْآخِرَةِ خَيْرٌ لِلَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَكَانُوا يَتَّقُونَ. And indeed, the reward of the hereafter is even better. Yes, Yusuf is mashallah now the richest man in Egypt, and he has his entourage and his palace and power, but the reward of the hereafter is even better for those who truly believed and had taqwa of Allah and did their duty to Him. Now this verse shows وَلَأَجْرُ الْآخِرَةِ خَيْرٌ. The reward of the hereafter is even better. Shows us that the believer shall be rewarded in this life. Because Allah uses the word better, and better is only used when there's two. And Sufyan ibn Uyayna and other scholars of the past, they use this verse to say, the believer shall get two rewards. He shall be rewarded for the good deed in this dunya, and he shall also be rewarded in the next. But of course, the one who did not have any faith in Allah, he will not be rewarded in the next, and he will only be rewarded in this world, and nothing will face him in the next. So this ayah, the whole story, as of yet, the same motif over and over again, one of the main motifs of the story. Righteousness will always save you. Turning to Allah and living a good life shall always bring about blessings in this world before that of the next. And with this, inshaAllah ta'ala, we open the floor for questions and then call the adhan for Salat al-Isha. Yes?
I read by Guru Brother, this was